The glass hits the marble floor before anyone screams. 1 second, the Whitmore estate is so quiet Jackson Caldwell can hear the candles burning. The next second, the east window explodes inward, and 4 men in black pour through the frame like smoke finding a gap, and the entire world changes temperature. Jackson does not run. He pulls his son behind the china cabinet in the dining room. 3 steps, no sound. Muscle memory from a life spent knowing where every shadow falls in every room he has ever cleaned. Malachi is 6 years old, and he already knows how to disappear. He presses his back flat against the wall, clutches his picture book to his chest, and goes so still he could be painted there. Jackson's hand covers his son's mouth, not roughly, firmly, the way you hold something precious when the ground starts moving. Hi viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The robbers sweep the ground floor in formation, practiced, tight, the kind of movement that does not belong to amateurs. 2 break for the main staircase. 1 goes left toward the study. The 4th stops dead in the dining room doorway and runs a flashlight across the space in one long, slow arc. The beam stops 2 inches from Jackson's shoe. He does not breathe. He does not blink. He has spent 7 years making himself invisible in rooms like this one, rooms that belong to powerful people, rooms where the wrong kind of attention is the most dangerous kind there is. He is very good at invisible. The man moves on. From somewhere above them, Mrs. Whitmore's bedroom, by the direction, a woman's voice cuts the air once, sharp and sudden, and then goes quiet in a way that is worse than screaming. The sound of zip ties follows. Low commands in clipped military syllables. Malachi's fingers curl around the hem of Jackson's apron and hold. Jackson counts seconds the way he counts everything, carefully, without panic, turning the numbers into a plan. The servant's exit is 28 feet behind him. The kitchen corridor is clear. He needs 16 seconds to reach the door, get it open, and get Malachi through it to the garden wall. He has mapped this route before, not because he expected this exact moment, but because Jackson Caldwell has never once in his adult life walked into a room without finding the way out of it first. He shifts his weight, prepares to move. Then the front doors open. Not the way the robbers came in, frantic, violent, purposeful. And these doors open like a man who owns them, slow, deliberate, the kind of entrance that does not require force because it has never needed it. The man who steps through is tall, black suit, no tie, a gun held in his right hand the way other men hold car keys, without thinking about it, without ceremony. His face in the low light of the chandelier is all angles, sharp jaw, sharper brow, and his eyes sweep the room with the efficient, unhurried movement of someone who has walked into dangerous places so many times that danger has stopped registering as a separate thing from ordinary life. He speaks once. Status. One of his men materializes from the staircase. Vault access in 4 minutes. Residents are contained. Staff is incomplete. The word drops into the room like a stone into still water. The man in the suit turns his head. His nostrils flare, barely, just barely, in the way that certain people do when they are reading a room by instinct rather than sight. His gaze moves slowly across the dining room, past the table, past the empty chairs, past the edge of the china cabinet, and stops. Malachi, pressed against the wall in the dark, draws one tiny breath. It is barely a sound. It is the sound a child makes when fear starts to win the fight against silence. Small, involuntary, almost nothing. The man in the suit goes completely still. His head turns, slowly, the way a compass needle turns when it finds north and cannot be argued with. He turns toward the china cabinet, toward Jackson, and when he speaks again, his voice drops to something so quiet it should not have been able to cross the room. I know that voice. Jackson's blood goes cold from the inside out. Because he knows that voice too. He has spent 6 years trying to forget it. Donovan Osei does not move toward the cabinet immediately. He stands in the center of the dining room with the gun at his side and every person in the house waiting for him to speak, and he just listens. Like a man trying to confirm something he cannot quite believe. Like a man who has heard a sound in a dream so many times that when it finally arrives in the waking world, he needs a moment to be sure he is not still asleep. Then he crosses the room in 6 steps, and rounds the corner of the cabinet. His eyes find Jackson first. They always find Jackson first. That is the thing that has terrified Jackson since the very beginning. The way this man's attention moves through crowds and rooms and years, like it has a specific destination and does not stop until it arrives. Then his gaze drops to Malachi. The boy stares back with his picture book against his chest and his eyes wide open. Dark hair, bone structure that belongs to Jackson, and eyes the color of deep water that have never once belonged to Jackson. Not for a single second, not since the morning Jackson first held him and understood with complete, devastating clarity exactly what kind of secret he was now responsible for keeping. Those eyes are Donovan's eyes, the exact shade, the exact depth, the exact quality of stillness in them that makes a person feel examined rather than seen. Donovan's face does not change, not the jaw, not the brow. But something moves behind those eyes, tectonic, structural, the kind of shift that happens below the surface of things and only becomes visible much later when the cracks appear. He looks back at Jackson. "Step out," he says. It is not a question. Jackson steps out from behind the cabinet, and Malachi moves with him, and Jackson puts one hand on his son's shoulder like a wall between the boy and everything else in the room. One of Donovan's men appears in the hallway. "Boss, the Whitmore vault has a secondary lock. We need another 6 minutes. Abort the operation." Silence drops over the house like a curtain. "Sir?" "Abort. Get everyone out. Leave the estate exactly as you found it." Donovan does not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. "You have 3 minutes." Another beat of silence, the kind where a man is weighing whether to push back, and then footsteps retreat. The house begins to empty. The tactical sounds, boots, equipment, the careful replacement of broken glass in the east window frame move toward the exits and then disappear entirely, and the Whitmore estate settles back into the particular quiet of a place that does not yet know how permanently it has been changed tonight. Donovan looks at Malachi. "How old is he?" he says. Not a question either, a man doing arithmetic. Jackson keeps his voice level. 6. The number lands between them, 6 years. Donovan counts backward through time the way you count backward through a life you thought you understood, reaching for the moment where everything changed and finding it, finding the exact date, the exact event, with the terrible precision of a man who is very good at numbers and very bad, suddenly, at knowing what to do with them. "Why didn't you tell me? You were the most powerful man in the room. I was the help." Something moves through Donovan's expression that has no clean name. It is not anger. Anger would be easier. It is something older than anger, something with more weight behind it, something that looks, terrifyingly, in the low light of the Whitmore chandelier, like a man understanding for the first time the size of what he missed. Malachi looks up at Donovan with those impossible eyes and says, with the frank, unbothered directness of a 6-year-old who has been raised by someone who treats honesty as a form of love, "Are you the important person my mama told me about?" The room goes absolutely quiet. Donovan looks at the boy, at his own eyes looking back at him from a face he has never seen before tonight. His mouth opens, closes. "I might be," he says carefully. Malachi considers this for 1 full second, then nods once, a single decided nod that is identical in every detail to a gesture Jackson has watched Donovan make twice tonight, and that has been living in his son's body for 6 years without either of them knowing its origin. "Okay," Malachi says, and opens his picture book. Jackson keeps his face still, his hand stays flat on his son's shoulder. His breathing stays even, but his chest is doing something that has no name either and that he has no plan for, and that is the most dangerous thing that has happened in this room all night. Because Jackson Caldwell always has a plan. And right now, for the first time in 6 years, he does not know what comes next. 7 years fold in half like paper. And one moment Jackson is standing in the Whitmore dining room with his hand on Malachi's shoulder and Donovan Osei 3 feet away. The next moment he is 23 years old, standing in a freight elevator at the Osei Tower, holding a tray of untouched champagne glasses, trying not to be noticed. It was a charity event on the 42nd floor, the kind of gala where the chandeliers alone cost more than Jackson's yearly salary. And no one notices the people carrying the trays because the people carrying the trays are not people in that kind of room. They are furniture that moves. Jackson had been good at being furniture. He moved through the crowd without touching anyone, collected empty glasses, kept his eyes down and his face smooth, and his whole body arranged into the posture of someone who was simply not there. And he was 2 months into a new placement with the staffing agency. Freshly 23, working double shifts to cover rent for the small apartment in Harlem he shared with a leaking ceiling and the specific silence of a person who has no one to call at the end of a hard day. He was crossing toward the service corridor when a man stepped back from a cluster of investors and turned at exactly the wrong moment. They nearly collided. Jackson caught the tray. Every glass stayed upright. He steadied himself, looked up to apologize, and Donovan Osei looked directly at him. Not through him. Not past him. Not with the mild, distracted glance that wealthy people give service staff before looking away. And he looked at Jackson the way Jackson had always suspected he looked at everything, as if whatever he was examining was the only thing in the room worth the attention. He said, "You're the most composed person here." Jackson said, "I'm the help." Donovan said, "That's not what I meant. It should have ended there. It almost ended there." Jackson almost walked back to the service corridor and catalogued the moment under the heading, "Strange Things Rich Men Say," and closed the file. But Donovan asked his name, and Jackson told him, not the name on the staffing agency's registry, but his real name, the one he almost never gave to people in rooms like that. And he still could not explain why, not that night and not in the 7 years after it. One conversation led to another. The gala thinned. The service staff was released at midnight. Donovan was still there. It lasted one night. One hotel room on the 41st floor of a building that overlooked the whole city. One night of being seen so clearly by another person that Jackson had physically not known what to do with himself, had lain awake after Donovan fell asleep, just staring at the ceiling and understanding, with cold, certain clarity, that this was the most dangerous situation he had ever been in. Not because of what Donovan was, but because of what Jackson felt, and what Jackson felt was something he could not afford. He left at 4 in the morning, gathered his clothes from the chair, wrote nothing, left nothing, took the service elevator because he knew where it was, and Donovan would not think to look there. He changed his name on the agency registration the next morning, took a different placement, started over. 9 months later, Malachi arrived, and Jackson looked at his son, at those dark lashes and that dark hair, and then, when the baby finally opened his eyes, at the deep, still blue water gaze that had no business being on a face that small, and understood that starting over was no longer an option. So he did the next best thing. He kept going, head down, hands steady. 7 years of silence, 7 years of, his father was someone important who didn't know he existed, which was the truest thing Jackson had ever said and the most carefully edited. 7 years of telling himself the distance was protection. Standing in the Whitmore dining room now, watching Donovan look at Malachi's eyes in the chandelier light, Jackson feels the seam of that story pull loose. "You looked for me," Jackson says. It comes out quieter than he intends. Donovan's gaze comes back to him. The morning after the gala. "You were gone. The agency had a different name on file." A beat. "I hired someone to find Jackson Caldwell. It took 8 months. By then you had moved 3 times. Jackson stares at him. "You looked for 8 months. I kept looking after that." Donovan says it without flinching. More quietly. "Through channels I didn't share with anyone in my organization." Something in his jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. "That's the only reason you and Malachi are still unknown to my enemies. I made sure the search was invisible." The sentence rearranges something inside Jackson's chest. He spent 7 years believing he was invisible because he was good at disappearing. And he is now understanding that some of that invisibility had a different source entirely. That a man who did not even know about Malachi had, without knowing why, kept them out of the light anyway. Malachi turns a page in his picture book. The sound is very loud in the quiet room. "There's something you need to know," Donovan says, and his voice drops to the register he has been using all night when the information is the kind that changes things. "The reason I was here tonight, the Whitmore estate, it was not only about the painting." Jackson looks at him. Someone in my organization has been leaking my movements for 4 months. Tonight was partly a test. His eyes are steady and very direct. The person who set this operation in motion, who gave me the intel, who arranged the timeline, is someone I trusted completely. And they knew I would be here tonight, which means by now they know something went wrong, and they will want to know why. Jackson understands immediately. His stomach tightens. They'll trace the abort back to the estate. Yes. They'll pull the staff files. Yes. Malachi turns another page. How long do we have? Jackson asks. Donovan checks his watch. His expression does not change. Less than we need. Jackson disappeared at 4 in the morning to protect himself, and Donovan spent 8 months looking for him anyway. And now, 7 years later, the secret Jackson has been guarding with his whole life is about to be exposed. Not by Donovan, but by Donovan's enemy. Comment right now, did Jackson make the right choice walking away that morning? And stay right here, because what happens in the next 60 seconds changes everything. Donovan's car is 3 blocks from the estate, a black SUV, dark windows, a driver who does not ask questions. He explains this the way he explains everything, without decoration, in the shortest number of words that will carry the full weight of the situation. He is standing in the Whitmore foyer, buttoning his jacket, and he looks at Jackson with the steady, non-negotiable directness of a man who has already decided what needs to happen and is now extending the courtesy of explaining it. I'm taking you both somewhere safe, tonight. Jackson crosses his arms. No. Donovan continues as if he has already anticipated this. The man who fed me the intel for tonight is named Darius Hale. He has been in my organization for 11 years. He is also, I have recently learned, selling access to a consortium of men who want my operation dismantled before March. He pauses. Darius is meticulous. If he has been watching this estate, and he has, because I have been using the Whitmore property as a secondary meeting location for 6 months, then he has records on every person inside this building. I'm staff. I'm not in your records. You will be in his. The statement sits between them without apology. Jackson thinks of Malachi's files, the school enrollment under his own name, the pediatric clinic 3 blocks from the estate, the staffing agency where Jackson has been registered for 4 years under a placement that lists the Whitmore estate as his primary location. All of it is findable, all of it leads back to this house. He uncrosses his arms. 24 hours, Donovan says. Let me deal with Darius. After that, I will give you whatever you want. Distance, financial support, complete absence from your lives. But tonight you both come with me. Jackson looks at Malachi, who has moved from the dining room to the bottom of the grand staircase and is sitting on the 3rd step. Picture book in his lap, watching both of them with the calm, measuring expression of a child who is running his own quiet calculations. What's your plan for Darius? Jackson asks. Contain him before he can reach the consortium. I have 2 people I trust, only 2, who can move on him tonight without tipping the rest of the organization. You've been operating with a mole for 4 months. How do you know your 2 people haven't been turned? Donovan looks at him. Something sharpens in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition, the specific, slightly unsettled expression of a man who is accustomed to being the only person in the room, asking the right questions. I don't, he says, which is exactly why I need tonight to work. And if it doesn't, then the situation becomes significantly more complicated. Malachi looks up from the 3rd step. Mama, he says with the tone of a person reporting a factual observation. That man has the same way of talking as you, like he's already thought about everything. Jackson looks at his son. Donovan looks at his son. Neither of them has anything to say to that. Jackson turns back to the foyer. He has 16 years of institutional knowledge of how powerful men operate in crisis, acquired 1 dinner service and 1 silent corridor at a time. And what he knows about this particular kind of man, the kind that walks through broken glass calmly, the kind that aborts a robbery mid-operation without raising his voice, is that this kind of man does not ask for things unless the alternative is genuinely worse. And what he knows about this particular situation is that Malachi's name is in a staffing file in a house that a mafia consortium now knows was the site of a botched operation by their primary target, and that Jackson Caldwell does not make decisions that put his son's name in the wrong hands. "We'll need Malachi's bag from the servants' quarters," Jackson says. "Third door on the left at the top of the back stairs. There's a brown stuffed rabbit in the front pocket. He says he doesn't need it anymore." He looks at Malachi, who is studying his picture book with exaggerated focus. He does. Malachi turns a page. Donovan nods once and moves for the back stairs without a word. Jackson watches him go, notes the particular way the man moves through an unfamiliar space, efficiently, without hesitation, as if the layout of unknown rooms is something his body resolves automatically. He makes no sound on the stairs. Malachi looks up from the book the moment Donovan disappears around the corner. He looks at Jackson with those unsettling blue eyes, and he says very quietly, "Is he going to leave again?" Jackson crouches down to his son's level, cups the back of his head gently. "I don't know yet, baby." Malachi processes this with the gravity of someone receiving a complicated answer to a question he has been holding for a very long time. Then he nods, one single nod, small and decided, and looks back at his book. "Okay," Malachi says. Jackson straightens, breathes. From the back stairs, barely audible, the sound of Donovan moving through the servants' quarters, careful, measured, the sound of a man navigating a part of a house he has never seen, finding a room that belongs to a child he has known for less than an hour, locating a stuffed rabbit in the front pocket of a bag without being told exactly where to look. Finding it immediately. Because Jackson understands suddenly, Donovan O.C. always finds the thing he is looking for. That is the part that scares him most. When Donovan comes back down the stairs with the bag over one shoulder and the brown rabbit in his hand, he crosses the foyer and holds it out to Malachi without commentary, without performance. Malachi takes it, studies Donovan's face for a moment. "You found it fast," Malachi says. "Front pocket," Donovan says. Malachi nods, satisfied, tucks the rabbit under his arm. "Okay, I'm ready." Jackson watches his 6-year-old son stand up from the step, picture book in one hand and rabbit in the other, and walk toward the front door of the Whitmore estate, like a person who has made up their mind. He watches Donovan follow, one step behind, the bag on his shoulder. And in the back of Jackson's mind, a calculation is completing itself. One he did not begin, did not plan, cannot stop. And its answer is something that 6 years of careful, deliberate distance was specifically designed to prevent. He follows his son out the door. Behind them, in the Whitmore estate, a phone begins to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. No one answers it. By morning, someone will notice. Malachi asked Jackson one question in that hallway. Is he going to leave again? And Jackson didn't have an answer. But the man Jackson has spent 6 years running from just packed his son's bag without being told where to look for it. Drop your thoughts below. Is that the kind of detail that changes things? And don't you dare close this video. Chapter 5 is where everything Donovan thinks he controls starts falling apart. The safe house is a brownstone in a part of Brooklyn where the trees are old and the streetlights are spaced far apart and no one leaves their curtains open after dark. Inside it is warm, clean and impersonal in the way of rooms kept ready for emergencies. White walls, good locks, furniture chosen for function. Someone has stocked the kitchen. Jackson finds this out because the first thing he does upon entering any unfamiliar space is locate the kitchen, and the first thing he does in any kitchen is identify what is available, because that is how Jackson Caldwell has moved through the world since he was old enough to understand that being prepared is the only form of safety that doesn't require trusting anyone. He makes tea. Malachi eats a bowl of cereal at the kitchen table, finishes it, examines the bottom of the bowl briefly, and then announces that he is tired. He is asleep before 9 o'clock, face turned toward the wall, the brown rabbit at his chin, the picture book open to its last page on the mattress beside him. Jackson stands in the kitchen doorway and looks at his sleeping son for a long moment. Then he turns around and finds Donovan standing at the window with his phone to his ear, speaking in a voice too low to make out, his back to the room. Jackson sits at the table and wraps both hands around his mug and waits. When Donovan ends the call and turns around, his face has changed in a way that is small and significant in the specific way of someone receiving information that confirms something they already feared. Tell me, Jackson says. Donovan sits across from him, sets the phone on the table face down, folds his hands on the surface, large hands, scarred at the knuckles, very still. Darius has been working with someone I did not know about, he says. His father. Jackson waits. Wendell Hale. I was told Wendell retired from this world 3 years ago. I believed it. I had no reason not to. Donovan's voice is flat in the specific way of a man who is angry at himself rather than the situation. He has been meeting with the consortium for 8 months, longer than I suspected Darius. They built this from the outside in. Wendell established the coalition, Darius provided the access. The operation tonight was designed not to succeed. He pauses. It was designed to fail in a way that exposed my position, showed the consortium where I was, what assets I had in the field, and what I was willing to risk. Jackson processes this in silence, sets down his mug. They let you think you were running an operation. They were running one against you. Yes. And the abort. We'll read to them as panic or discovery. Either way, it confirms I found the breach. Donovan looks at his hands. Oh, which means they accelerate. The kitchen is very quiet. The radiator in the corner ticks against the cold outside. Who are you moving on Darius tonight? Jackson asks. A man named Reyes and a woman named Petra Voss. She has worked for me for 6 years. I trust her more than anyone currently in my organization. Why those two specifically? Reyes because his loyalty to me predates Darius's involvement entirely. They do not know each other, have no overlap, no shared contact points I can identify. Petra because she has had 3 opportunities in the past 2 years to move against me for significant financial gain and did not take any of them. He looks at Jackson. I watch for that. Who doesn't take the opportunity when it's in front of them? It tells you more than anything else. Jackson looks at him steadily. That's how you knew I wasn't a threat tonight, in the dining room. A beat. Yes. Because I had the servants' exit 28 feet behind me and I didn't use it. You stayed in the building, with your son, in the one blind spot the security cameras don't cover. Donovan's gaze is direct and completely level. That's not someone running. That's someone who knows exactly where they are at all times and has decided that moving is more dangerous than staying still. Jackson says nothing, because that is precisely correct, and it is extremely uncomfortable to be read that accurately by a man he has spent 6 years specifically trying not to be near. I need to tell you something, Jackson says, about the consortium. Donovan goes still in a different way. Alert, focused. I have worked in this city's wealthy estates for 7 years. In that time, I have been invisible in rooms where men discuss things they should not discuss in front of witnesses. Jackson keeps his voice even. In this past 6 months at the Whitmore estate, 3 men have met in the private dining room 4 separate times. One of them is a man named Cornelius Veron. Imports, Red Hook docks. One is a man with a Dutch accent and a compass tattoo on his left wrist. The Whitmore family calls him an old friend. I don't have a name. He pauses. The third man has silver hair and walks with a cane he only uses when he thinks someone is watching. When he believes the room is empty, he puts the cane against the wall and stands up straight. Jackson looks directly at Donovan. He knows your name. He said it once, across the dinner table, in the specific tone people use for things they've been thinking about for a long time. He said, Donovan will not see it coming. The kitchen air shifts. Donovan's hands, flat on the table, do not move. His expression does not change. But something behind his eyes goes very cold and very still, the way deep water goes still before something moves beneath it. Silver hair, Donovan says. Cane he doesn't need. Yes. Does he have a scar, here? He touches the left side of his jaw. Jackson thinks back. Dinner service, October. The man turned to speak to Cornelius Veron, and the lamp on the sideboard caught the left side of his face. Yes, Jackson says. Donovan is quiet for 4 full seconds. Then, that's Wendell Hale. Not Darius, not the son feeding intel from inside the organization, the father. The man Donovan was told had retired. The man who has been sitting at dinner tables in the Whitmore estate for 6 months, while Jackson poured water and cleared plates and catalogued every word. Donovan looks at Jackson across the kitchen table of a safe house in Brooklyn at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, and the expression on his face is one Jackson has never seen on him before. It is the expression of a man who is genuinely, for the first time, uncertain. His phone lights up on the table, he turns it over, reads the screen, and something changes in his face, fast, like a switch, the uncertainty gone, replaced by something harder and more immediate. "That's Reyes," he says. "He was supposed to check in an hour ago." He answers. He listens for 9 seconds. He ends the call and stands up in one movement. "We have to leave," he says, "right now." Jackson is already on his feet. "How long?" "Minutes." Jackson is already moving toward the bedroom. Malachi doesn't wake clean. He'll be confused. "I'll carry him." Donovan is already at the bedroom door, already doing the same thing Jackson does in every room, reading the layout, identifying the path. "You take his bag. Is there another way out of this building?" "Basement," Jackson says immediately. "Laundry room. Second door connects to the building next door. I saw the utility diagram in the closet when we arrived." Donovan stops, looks at Jackson. "You read the building diagram," he says, "in the first 30 minutes. "I read everything in the first 30 minutes, Jackson says. "Malachi's bag." "Go." Donovan goes. Jackson hears him cross the bedroom floor with the careful, weight-controlled steps of a large man trying not to wake a sleeping child. Then silence. Then the sound of a child being lifted. And here is the thing Jackson was not prepared for, the thing that hits him in the sternum like something physical. Malachi does not wake. He makes one small sound, the soft, boneless sigh of a child moving from one safe place to another, and goes still again. Because he has decided, somewhere in the wordless place where a 6-year-old makes his decisions, that the arms holding him are safe. Donovan comes back through the door with Malachi against his chest, the boy's head on his shoulder, the brown rabbit in Malachi's fist. He looks at Jackson. Jackson looks at his son sleeping on the chest of his father. He picks up the bag. "Basement," he says. They move. Down 14 steps in the dark, Jackson's hand flat on the wall, counting. The laundry room smells of cold pipe. The second door opens without sound. The passage beyond it is narrow and dark, and the floor is uneven, and behind them, from somewhere above, the sound of the front door of the building receiving a knock that is less of a knock and more of a notification. At the end of the passage, a door, a stairwell, a service exit opening onto a side alley. Cold air hits them all at once. February, sharp and clean, the kind of cold that wakes you up immediately. Malachi opens his eyes, blinks at the dark sky. Looks at Donovan's face, looks at Jackson. "Mama," he says, with the extraordinary calm of a child who has inherited his mother's gift for treating impossible situations as straightforward ones. "Is this still the adventure?" Donovan's jaw tightens. "Yes," he says, voice carefully controlled. "Still the adventure." Malachi nods, closes his eyes again. "Okay." They move down the alley. Behind them, inside the brownstone, the front door opens, and 2 men step into an empty safe house and find nothing. No bags, no dishes in the sink, no sign of occupation except a single mug of tea on the kitchen table, still warm. Reyes is alive. That is the first thing Donovan confirms when they reach the second location. A mid-range hotel in Midtown. Cash payment, lobby that smells of industrial cleaner, the kind of place where nobody looks at anybody else long enough to remember a face. Reyes is alive, but his phone is not in his possession anymore, which means everything Reyes knew about tonight, the safe house address, the asset count, the abort timeline, is now in someone else's hands. Donovan gets this information in 11 words from Petra Voss, are delivered by text in a code that looks like a grocery list. He reads it standing at the hotel room window while Jackson settles Malachi onto the second bed. The boy goes down without argument, third move of the night, and he has adapted to each one with a quietness that is both impressive and quietly heartbreaking. The way children adapt to instability when instability has been explained to them as something manageable by a parent who needed them to believe that. Donovan watches Malachi pull the brown rabbit under his chin. Then he turns back to the window and looks at the city and begins making the kind of calculations that have kept him alive for 15 years in a world that actively tries to kill people like him. Jackson appears at the edge of his peripheral vision, sits at the small table near the window, sets 2 cups of vending machine coffee between them. Black for Donovan, the way Donovan takes it, which Donovan notices without commenting on, filing it in the place where he files things that matter. Reyes talked, Jackson says. Not an accusation, a fact being placed on the table between them so they can work with it. He didn't have a choice. Donovan keeps his voice low for Malachi's sake. Darius's people are not careful about how they ask questions. So they have the safe house address? Yes. And they know we moved? Yes. Which means they know there are 3 of us. Donovan sets the phone down, looks at Jackson directly. Yes, they know about you. They may not know about Malachi specifically, but they know I left the Whitmore estate with 2 people who are not part of my organization. Oh, and they will find out who you are before morning if Darius has access to the staffing agency's records. Jackson wraps both hands around the coffee cup. His hands are steady. They are always steady, and by now Donovan understands that this is not the absence of fear. It is something Jackson does to fear. Some internal act of will that compresses it into a usable form and keeps it from occupying the controls. It is, Donovan thinks, the single most impressive thing he has ever watched a person do consistently under pressure. Tell me about Petra Voss, Jackson says. Donovan does. Petra Voss came up through the financial side of his organization, forensic accounting, money movement, the kind of work that requires absolute precision and the ability to maintain silence about things that could destroy careers and end lives. She is 41, has a daughter in college in Atlanta, and has been offered more money than Donovan pays her by 3 separate competing interests in the past 4 years. She turned all 3 down. She did not report any of the approaches to Donovan. He found out independently, which is exactly how he prefers to find things out, without anyone knowing he is looking. She didn't report the approaches, Jackson says. Why does that make you trust her more? Most people would say that's a red flag. Because if she had reported them, it would mean she wanted me to know she was loyal. Petra doesn't perform loyalty. She just is. Or she isn't. Donovan looks at the window. The fact that she said nothing means she handled it herself, quietly, without needing recognition for it. That's a different kind of person. Jackson is quiet for a moment. That's exactly how you described noticing me in the dining room tonight. Donovan looks at him. You said I didn't use the exit even though it was behind me, Jackson continues. You trusted that because I wasn't performing a choice. I was just making it. He meets Donovan's gaze steadily. You read people the same way I read rooms. Yes, Donovan says simply. The hotel room is very quiet. The city hums outside the window, indifferent and enormous. Malachi breathes softly on the second bed. What does Petra need from you tonight to move on, Darius? Jackson asks. Confirmation of his location. He has 3 places he rotates between. An apartment in Chelsea, a property in Flushing, and a boat moored at the 79th Street Marina. If I send Petra to the wrong location, we lose the window. Can you get his location confirmed before dawn? Possibly, if one of my remaining contacts in his circle is still clean. He pauses. That is the part I don't know. Jackson looks at the table, turns the coffee cup in a slow half-circle. Thinking. The Whitmore family has a household account with a private car service, high-end. The kind of service that drives people who don't want records of where they've been. He looks up. In 6 months, I logged every vehicle that came and went from the estate for the private dining room meetings. Make, model, plate number. I kept it in a notes file on my phone because I keep records of everything that moves through a space I'm responsible for. Donovan stares at him. You have plate numbers for the consortium's vehicles. I have plate numbers, arrival times, departure times, and in 2 cases, partial phone numbers from calls taken in the hallway where people forgot I was standing 3 feet away, refilling the water pitcher. Jackson unlocks his phone and sets it on the table and turns it to face Donovan. I don't know what any of it means in your world, but you might. Donovan looks at the notes file. He reads for 40 seconds. Then he picks up his phone and calls Petra. The call lasts 4 minutes. When it ends, Donovan sets the phone down and looks at Jackson across the small hotel table with an expression that Jackson does not know how to categorize yet. It is not gratitude exactly, because it is larger than gratitude, and it is not surprise exactly, because it is more specific than surprise. It is the expression of a man who has spent 15 years in a world where information is currency and power is the only real protection, encountering for the first time someone who has been quietly accumulating both without ever intending to use them, and understanding suddenly how much he has underestimated the person standing 6 feet from him every day for the past 7 years. One of those plate numbers belongs to a vehicle registered to a shell company that Darius uses for personal transportation, Donovan says. Petra can trace it to a current location. Good, Jackson says. The partial phone number you have from the hallway call, the one ending in 7749. Yes. That's Wendell Hale's private line. Donovan's voice is very level, a number I have never had. A number that does not exist in any record my organization has ever produced. Jackson processes this. He took a call in the hallway of the Whitmore estate, because he didn't think anyone was listening. He wasn't wrong to think that. Most people in that hallway would not have been listening. Jackson meets his eyes. I'm not most people in a hallway. For one moment, just a flash, something moves across Donovan Osei's face that is unguarded in a way none of the rest of his face has been tonight. Open, almost undone. And then it is controlled again, filed away, and he is back to the steady, directional focus of a man who has just acquired everything he needs to end a 4-month problem before the city wakes up. He stands, picks up the phone, looks at Jackson. Sleep, he says. I'll be at the window. I need 3 hours to run this through Petra and confirm Darius's location. Jackson shakes his head. I won't sleep. I know. A pause, the specific pause of a man adjusting what he was about to say. Then rest. You've been holding everything together since 9 o'clock. Jackson looks at him. So have you. I'm used to it. So am I, Jackson says. Donovan holds his gaze for a moment, then he turns back to the window and begins the work. Jackson leans back in the chair, watches the city through the glass, watches Malachi breathe on the second bed, watches Donovan's reflection in the window, the set of his shoulders, the movement of his thumbs across the phone screen, the stillness of a man in the middle of a war who has just, for the first time, stopped fighting it alone. At 2:47 in the morning, Donovan's phone buzzes once, and he reads the message. Something shifts in his posture, fast, like a gear changing. He turns around. Petra has Darius's location. Jackson sits up straight. The boat. Donovan looks at him. How did you know? Because it's the only location of the 3 that doesn't have a fixed address on record. It's the place you go when you think someone is coming for the other 2. Jackson stands up. He knows you're closing in. Donovan is already moving. If he gets off that boat before Petra reaches the marina, how long does she have? 20 minutes, maybe less. Then stop talking, Jackson says, and make the call. Donovan makes the call. 12 minutes later, and Petra Voss walks onto a dock at the 79th Street Marina in the dark of a February morning and finds Darius Hale standing on the deck of his boat with a bag already packed and a phone in his hand. He sees her and understands immediately. He does not run. There is nowhere to run to on a dock at 3 in the morning with Petra Voss between him and the shore, and Darius Hale is many things, but he is not a man who wastes effort on exits that are already closed. He sits down on the deck of the boat, and across the city in a midtown hotel room, Donovan's phone receives a 2-word message from Petra. He reads it, sets the phone down, stands at the window for a long moment. Then he turns around and discovers that Jackson is not at the table. Jackson is standing in the middle of the room, between the window and the beds, hands at his sides, completely still. His face has the expression Donovan is learning to read, the one that sits 3 layers beneath the controlled surface, the one that only appears when Jackson has run out of logistical problems to solve and is left, for one unguarded moment, with just the reality of where he is and who he is standing in a room with. It's done, Donovan says. Jackson looks at him. Darius is contained. Petra has him. He pauses. Wendell will know by morning, but without Darius running point, the consortium loses its access to my operations. They're blind. Jackson nods slowly. And Wendell himself. Is a problem for tomorrow. Donovan meets his eyes. Tonight is over. The room holds very still. Malachi turns over in his sleep and says one word, soft, shapeless, the language of a dream, and goes quiet again. Jackson looks at his son, looks at Donovan. "You should know something," Jackson says. His voice is even. It is always even. "When I left that night 7 years ago, the hotel room, 4 in the morning, I didn't leave because I didn't care about what happened." He stops, finds the precise word. "I left because I cared about it in a way that I didn't know how to protect myself from. And I have spent 6 years choosing between two things I couldn't figure out how to have at the same time." Donovan is very still. "Safety," Jackson says, "and you." The word sits between them in the quiet hotel room like something finally set down after a very long time of being carried. Donovan opens his mouth and Jackson's phone rings. The number on the screen is not one he recognizes. Area code 212. 7 digits that mean nothing to him. He answers. A voice on the other end, male, an older, unhurried, and says, "Mr. Caldwell, I think it's time we had a conversation. I understand you've been very helpful to Donovan tonight." A pause. "I also understand you have a son, 6 years old, dark hair, blue eyes." Another pause, longer, deliberate. "I know which school he attends." The line goes dead. Jackson lowers the phone. Donovan reads his face and is across the room in 2 steps. "Who was that?" Jackson looks up at him. "Wendell Hale," he says. "He has Malachi's school." Donovan has Malachi in his arms before Jackson finishes the sentence. Not because Jackson asked, not because there was a conversation about it. Just, Donovan crosses the room, lifts the boy from the bed in one careful motion, and positions himself between Malachi and the hotel room door in the way that certain people position themselves between threats and the things that matter, without thinking, without being told, the way breathing happens. Malachi stirs, opens his eyes halfway, looks at Donovan's face. "Again?" he says. "One more time," Donovan says. Malachi closes his eyes. "Okay." Jackson is already at the window, scanning the street below. 3 a.m. in Midtown, sparse traffic, a delivery truck at the corner, 2 people walking a dog on the far sidewalk. Nothing that looks like a problem. Everything could be a problem. "How did he get my number?" Jackson says. It is not a question he expects Donovan to answer. He is thinking out loud, running the chain backward, Whitmore Estate to staffing agency to payroll records. I payroll records to the emergency contact filed under his name 3 years ago when the agency updated their system, and Jackson, for the first and only time in 7 years, entered a real phone number instead of a dummy one because the form required it, and the HR coordinator was watching. His real number, his personal cell, the one that also, when you search the associated account, lists one dependent. Malachi Jackson Caldwell, date of birth, current enrolled school. "The staffing agency," Jackson says. Donovan looks at him. "They have everything. My real number, Malachi's information, I filed it once, 3 years ago. I thought the record was internal only." He turns from the window. "Wendell's people got into the staffing agency system, which means they've had your information since before tonight." Jackson meets his eyes. Wendell didn't start looking after the abort. He was already looking. This has been running longer than Darius, longer than 4 months. The room reconfigures itself around this fact. Donovan shifts Malachi's weight slightly, the boy still asleep against his shoulder, and his face does what it does when new information is arriving at a rate that requires immediate structural reassessment. Goes very still, very inward, the thinking invisible from the outside but unmistakable in its quality. "He called you instead of me," Donovan says. "Yes. Which means he wants you to know that he has leverage." "Not me." He pauses. "He's using you to send me a message." "What message?" Donovan looks at her directly. That even with Darius contained, he can still reach the things I can't afford to lose. The sentence lands exactly as hard as it is meant to. Jackson looks at Malachi, at the brown rabbit tucked under his son's arm, at the picture book that Donovan retrieved from the second bed without being asked and is holding against Malachi's back like a second layer of protection. "Then we can't wait until morning," Jackson says. "No. Petra." Petra is with Darius. I can't pull her without losing containment. Who else? Donovan is quiet for 3 seconds. There is one other person. Zara Mack. She has worked adjacent to my organization, not inside it, never on the payroll, never with access to operational details. She is a private security specialist. She knows me, knows my world, and has helped me with sensitive extractions twice before. Can you reach her at 3 in the morning? Zara Mack doesn't sleep at conventional hours. He shifts Malachi again. But using her means telling her about Malachi, about you, about all of it. Jackson looks at him. Is she safe? She's the safest person I know who is not in this room. Then call her, Jackson says, and tell her everything. Donovan nods once and makes the call. Zara Mack answers on the second ring with the alert, clear voice of someone who was absolutely already awake. Donovan speaks for 90 seconds. There is a pause on her end. Not surprise exactly, more the sound of a person rapidly updating a model of the world they thought they understood. Then Zara says, "Send me the school address. I'll have eyes on it in 40 minutes. The call ends. "Ty, she's moving," Donovan says. "Good." Jackson picks up Malachi's bag from the floor. "We're moving too. Where do you want to go?" Jackson looks around the hotel room. He has read this building the same way he reads every building. Exits, blind spots, the utility diagram in the hallway closet, the service stairwell he found while Donovan was on the phone with Petra. He knows 3 ways out of this room. He knows which one is cleanest. But he also knows that clean exits only work when the person coming for you doesn't already know where you are. And Wendell Hale called his phone, which means Wendell Hale has his location method, which means this room is already compromised, and the only question is how long they have before someone acts on it. Service stairs, Jackson says, north side of the building. There's a laundry loading dock on the ground floor that opens onto the side street. We need a vehicle that isn't connected to your name or your organization. Donovan looks at him. You found the loading dock. I find everything in the first 30 minutes. Jackson moves to the door. The vehicle. Zara will have one on the side street in 20 minutes. We'll be there in 12. Jackson opens the door and looks back at Donovan, at his son sleeping on the chest of a man he has known for 6 hours, held there with a steadiness that has not wavered once. Can you keep him still on the stairs? Donovan looks down at Malachi. Yes. He might wake on the cold air again. I know. He meets Jackson's eyes. I've got him. 3 words, no decoration, no performance. Jackson turns and leads them into the hallway. They move through the hotel in silence, Jackson first, Donovan 1 step behind with Malachi, service stairs exactly where Jackson said they would be, 14 floors down in the dark, 1 hand on the railing, the other flat on the wall. At the loading dock, Jackson checks the side street through the small wire glass window in the door before he opens it. Clear, they step out into the February cold. Malachi opens his eyes at the cold air, wide this time, fully awake, taking in the dark alley and the loading dock, and his mother and the man holding him with the alert, assessing look of a child cataloguing a new situation. Where are we going now? He asks. Donovan looks down at him. Somewhere safer. Malachi considers this. Is there food there? I'm hungry again. Malachi, Jackson says quietly. I'm just asking. I'll find you food, Donovan says. I promise. Malachi studies his face for a moment with those ancient blue eyes, then nods. Okay. He looks at the rabbit in his hand, looks back at Donovan. You're pretty good at carrying me. Donovan is quiet for 2 full seconds. Thank you. You don't drop me even when you're doing other things. Malachi settles his head back against Donovan's shoulder with the absolute devastating trust of a 6-year-old who has decided without ceremony and without conditions that this is a safe place to be. That's important. The alley holds very still. Jackson looks away, looks at the side street, looks anywhere except at the expression on Donovan Osei's face. And because whatever is happening on that face right now is too large and too honest for a dark alley at 3 in the morning, and Jackson does not have the capacity to process it and stay functional at the same time. A black car turns onto the side street and slows. The window comes down. Zara Mack is 43, natural hair pulled back, wearing a jacket that has enough pockets to mean something, and looking at the three of them with the specific, comprehensive gaze of a professional who is rapidly absorbing a situation and already 3 moves ahead of it. "Get in," she says. "All of you, now." They get in. The car moves. Zara drives without speaking for 2 full minutes, navigating streets that are still and grey with early morning. Then, from the front seat, without turning around, she says, "Wendell Hale made a second call after he called you, Jackson." Jackson sits forward. To who? To someone inside the school. She glances in the rearview mirror. Her eyes are steady. "I don't know who yet, but there's already a car parked outside the building." Malachi is awake now, fully awake. He looks at Jackson with his blue eyes in the dark of the back seat, and he says nothing, because Malachi Caldwell is his mother's son, and his mother's son knows when to be quiet. But he reaches out and takes Jackson's hand, and holds on. The car parked outside Malachi's school is a grey sedan, no plates. Zara has eyes on it through her contact, a woman named Brianna Locke, who runs a private security firm out of a second-floor office 3 buildings down from the school, and who owes Zara a favor significant enough that she answered a 3:47 a.m. phone call without asking why. Brianna's text arrives on Zara's phone while they are still moving. Grey sedan, driver still inside, engine running, second person in the passenger seat. Neither has moved in 20 minutes. 2 people. Engine running at 4 in the morning outside a closed elementary school. Waiting. Donovan reads the text over Zara's shoulder from the back seat. His jaw tightens once. They're not there to grab anyone. The school is closed. They're there to confirm the location. He looks at Jackson. Wendell is establishing that the threat is real. He wants you to know he can reach Malachi. He's not making a move yet. He's showing you the hand before he plays it. Why? Jackson asks. Because he doesn't want to take Malachi. He wants to use Malachi. Donovan's voice is very level. The moment he makes an actual move against your son, he loses leverage. What he wants is for me to know that he has it. Jackson processes this. He wants you to back down, stop pursuing Darius, let the consortium complete whatever they have planned for March. Yes. And if you don't back down. Donovan is quiet for 1 full second. Then the threat becomes something other than a show of hands. The car moves through empty streets, the city reduced at this hour to streetlights and the occasional yellow glow of an all-night diner. Malachi is between Jackson and Donovan on the back seat, fully awake, and turning the brown rabbit over in his hands with the focused, repetitive motion of a child who is managing something internal by keeping his hands occupied. Jackson puts one arm around him. Malachi leans in. "Zara," Donovan says, "Wendell's location." "Working on it." She takes a left, then another. He's not easy to find when he doesn't want to be, but he called from a number, and that number hit 3 cell towers, and Brianna's people are triangulating. She glances in the rear view again. 15 minutes, maybe. "He's an old man with a cane," Donovan says. "He won't be moving fast." "He doesn't move at all when he has other people moving for him," Zara says. "That's what makes him hard. You find the muscle, you lose the man. You go for the man directly, and the muscle goes to ground and you never find it." "How do you take him then?" Jackson asks. Zara looks at him in the mirror. "You take the thing he's using as leverage. You remove it from the equation. The moment the leverage is gone, Wendell has no move left." Jackson understands this immediately. You move Malachi somewhere Wendell can't find. Not just Malachi. Zara looks at the road. Both of you. Somewhere completely outside Wendell's information network. Somewhere none of Donovan's people have ever been connected to. No staffing records, no organizational history, no digital trail. She pauses. Somewhere personal. Somewhere clean. The car goes quiet. Donovan is looking at his phone. Something moves across his face, a small private thing that he resolves internally before it reaches the surface. Then he says, "And very carefully, there's a property in Westchester, not in my name, not in any name connected to my organization. It was my grandmother's. I inherited it privately 12 years ago through a family attorney, and I have never told anyone in my professional life that it exists." Zara glances at him in the mirror. "You're sure?" "I have never told a single person in my organization. Not Darius, not anyone. He meets Zara's eyes in the rear view. Wendell Hale cannot find what I have never disclosed. Jackson looks at him. A property you've kept completely separate. For 12 years. Why? Donovan is quiet for a moment. Because my grandmother was the one person in my life who existed entirely outside the world I built. And I kept the property separate because I needed one place to remain. He finds the word with the same care Jackson uses for difficult words. Untouched. Malachi looks up from the rabbit. Looks at Donovan. Was she nice? Your grandmother? Donovan looks down at his son. She was the best person I knew. Malachi nods slowly. Mama says the best people leave the most space when they go. Donovan looks at Jackson. Jackson looks at his son and decides, for the 900th time in 6 years, that Malachi Caldwell is going to be the most extraordinary person any of them have ever known. Westchester, Jackson says. How far? 40 minutes from where we are now. Donovan looks at Zara. Get Brianna to hold her position on the school. If that sedan moves before we're clear of the city, I want to know immediately. Done. Zara's phone buzzes on the center console. She reads it at a red light. Her expression shifts, a tightening around the eyes. Brianna says the sedan just had a visitor, someone on foot. Approached the driver's window, spoke for 30 seconds, walked back into the school building. The light changes. Zara doesn't move immediately. The school has a night custodian on shift this week. Emergency maintenance on the HVAC system. Brianna cross-referenced the work order when she pulled the building info. Jackson's stomach drops. The custodian is Wendell's inside contact. That's what it looks like. He doesn't need to grab Malachi from outside, Donovan says. He already has someone inside. He was showing us the sedan to watch us focus on the wrong door. The car fills with a very specific kind of silence, the kind that arrives when multiple people in a room simultaneously understand that they have been looking at the wrong thing, and that the right thing has been in plain sight the whole time, and that Wendell Hale, silver-haired and cane-walking and retired, is the most careful and patient opponent any of them has encountered. He was never going to act on the school tonight, Jackson says slowly. He called to make sure we knew about the school, so we'd focus there. So we'd spend the night protecting a building that isn't open and a child who wasn't in it. While we were distracted, Donovan says. What was he doing while we were distracted? Jackson asks. Zara's phone rings. She answers immediately. I listens for 5 seconds. Hangs up. Petra Voss, she says. Brianna just picked up a police scanner call. 45 minutes ago, a call came into the precinct near the marina. Disturbance on a private vessel. Nobody breathes. Darius Hale is no longer on the boat, Zara says. Petra is gone. The boat is empty. Donovan goes completely still. Darius is out, Petra is missing, and Wendell Hale has spent the last hour watching them scramble from a distance, pulling strings they didn't know existed, moving pieces off the board while they protected one that was never in play. Malachi puts his hand on Donovan's arm. He doesn't say anything. He just puts his small hand on the man's arm and holds it there, the way children sometimes do when they understand that a person needs an anchor and do not yet know how to offer one in words. Or Donovan looks down at his son's hand. Something in the set of his shoulders changes, not collapse, not defeat, something more honest than either. The specific shift of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just, in the back seat of a car at 4 in the morning, allowed himself to feel the weight of it. Westchester, Donovan says. His voice is steady. Now. Zara drives. Behind them, at the marina, somewhere on the dark water of the Hudson River, a boat rocks empty on its moorings. And in a location none of them know yet, Wendell Hale picks up his phone. Dials a number. Speaks 4 words. Bring me the lawyer. A white farmhouse at the end of a gravel road, set back from everything behind old oak trees that have been there longer than anyone currently alive. The porch light comes on automatically when Zara's car turns into the drive, amber and steady, like something left on for a person expected home. Donovan has the key on a ring with nothing else on it, just the key, plain metal, no label. He unlocks the front door and steps inside and turns on the hall light, and the house opens around them, clean, still, smelling of old wood and the particular quiet of a space that has been kept rather than lived in, maintained rather than occupied. Malachi walks in and turns a slow circle in the hallway, looking at everything. "It's a real house," he says. "Yes," Donovan says. "Not a hotel?" "No." Malachi nods approvingly. "Good. Hotels don't have kitchens you can actually use." He looks up at Donovan. "Oh, you said you'd find food." "I did say that." "I don't forget things people say." Jackson looks at the ceiling briefly. "Malachi." "I'm just reminding him," Malachi says serenely, and walks toward what he has correctly identified as the kitchen, because Malachi Caldwell locates kitchens the same way his mother does, and this is either nature or the most specific form of nurture Jackson has ever accidentally transmitted. Zara stays outside. She has positioned the car across the drive and is on the phone with Brianna, managing the information coming in from the city, and her posture through the window, alert, rooted, facing outward, is the posture of a person who has decided that nothing reaches this house while she is standing in front of it. Donovan stands in the hall and looks at the house for a moment. At the photographs on the wall, old ones, some black and white, a woman with a wide face and bright eyes who appears in multiple frames across what appears to be 5 decades of life. His grandmother, undeniable in the line of her jaw, the quality of the way she occupies space in every photograph. Fully, without apology. Malachi reappears in the kitchen doorway. "There are eggs," he announces, "and bread, and something in a can that might be soup." "The property manager restocks it monthly," Donovan says. "Can you make eggs?" Malachi asks him. Donovan looks at him. "Yes." "Good." Malachi disappears back into the kitchen. "Mama doesn't cook eggs the way I like them. She makes them too right." Jackson looks at Donovan. "He means I don't put enough butter in the pan." "I gathered," Donovan says. And for the first time since the Whitmore estate, something in his face releases, a specific tension, a held thing. And what replaces it is not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. The shape of a face that has remembered briefly what it was before the night started. He goes to the kitchen. Jackson stands in the hallway alone for a moment. He looks at the photographs of Donovan's grandmother on the wall. He looks at the house. The real house, not a hotel or a safe room or a space kept sterile for emergencies, but a place that someone loved enough to maintain across years and seasons and the long distance of a life that moved in a very different direction. He thinks about what it means that Donovan has kept this place entirely outside the world he built. One untouched thing, one door that no part of that life has ever come through. And now they are through it. Jackson sets Malachi's bag down at the foot of the stairs. From the kitchen, the sound of a pan hitting a stove. Donovan's voice saying something low. Malachi's voice responding with a specificity that suggests he is explaining exactly how the butter should look before the eggs go in. Jackson walks to the kitchen doorway. Donovan is at the stove with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled. Malachi is on a kitchen stool at the counter, the brown rabbit propped against the fruit bowl, supervising with the concentrated intensity he brings to anything he has decided matters. He is telling Donovan about a boy at school named Terence who cannot sit still and always has the wrong colored pencil and borrows Malachi's without asking and returns it shorter. Donovan is listening. Actually listening, not the performed listening of an adult managing a child, but the real kind, the kind where the information being received is being filed and held. He asks one question. Does Terence know he's bothering you when he borrows the pencil? Malachi considers this very seriously. I don't think so. He doesn't look like he's doing it on purpose. He just looks like he doesn't have enough. That's an important distinction, Donovan says. Malachi nods. Mama says most people who take things aren't trying to take from you. They're just trying to fill something up in themselves. Donovan glances over his shoulder at Jackson. Jackson leans against the doorframe and says nothing. The eggs go in the pan. They eat at the kitchen table, Malachi with focused enthusiasm, Donovan with black coffee, and Jackson with tea made from the tin in the cabinet above the stove. The table is round and old and has the particular quality of furniture that has held 1,000 different meals and carries all of them invisibly in its grain. At 5:20 in the morning, Zara comes inside. She sits at the table, accepts the coffee Donovan pours without comment. looks at all three of them. Petra is alive, she says. The kitchen inhales. Wendell's people had her for 2 hours. She did not give them anything. Zara wraps her hands around the coffee mug. They released her, which means Wendell decided she wasn't the pressure point he needed. She looks at Donovan. You are. He wants to meet, Donovan says. It is not a question. He reached out through the lawyer. A man named Gerald Obi, estate attorney, handles Wendell's legitimate holdings. And he contacted your business attorney at 5 a.m. and left a message. What does Wendell want? To talk, in person, this morning. Zara sets the mug down. He says he wants to make an arrangement. Wendell Hale doesn't make arrangements, Donovan says. He makes terms. There's a difference. I know. Zara meets his eyes. He specified the location, neutral ground, a restaurant in the Flatiron he has a stake in. Public, before the lunch crowd. She pauses. He also specified who he wants in the room. Donovan waits. You, Zara says, and Jackson. The table goes very still. Malachi, who has been listening to all of this with his usual quality of quiet, full-body attention, looks at Jackson. Jackson looks at Donovan. Donovan looks at Zara. Why Jackson? Because Jackson knows things about the consortium that Wendell did not plan on. The plate numbers, the phone number, 6 months of documented meetings. Zara looks at Jackson directly. Wendell's been in this world long enough to know that the most dangerous person in any situation is not the one with the most power. It's the one who has been quietly watching and remembering everything while everyone else assumed they were furniture. Malachi looks at his eggs. Then, very quietly, to no one in particular, he says, "That's my mama." Nobody at the table speaks for a moment. Jackson looks at his son. At this 6-year-old boy who was raised in the margins of powerful people's lives and has inherited with complete unconscious precision the ability to identify the exact center of any situation and name it simply. "I'll go," Jackson says. Donovan turns to him immediately. "You don't have to." "I know." Jackson meets his eyes. "I'll go." Donovan looks at him for a long moment. The kitchen is very still. The oak trees outside are starting to show in the early morning light, enormous and unhurried, the way old things stand in the presence of urgency. "Then we go together," Donovan says. Jackson nods once. Zara stands. "I'll stay here with Malachi." She looks at Malachi. "You and I are going to need to have a conversation about what you know how to cook, because it is going to be a long morning." Malachi straightens slightly on his stool. "I know how to make cereal very well." "That's a start," Zara says. Donovan pushes back from the table. He looks at Malachi, at his son, sitting in his grandmother's kitchen at 5:30 in the morning with a brown rabbit and a leftover piece of toast. And something in his face does the thing it does now. The thing Jackson has watched happen 3 or 4 times in the past 8 hours. It opens. Not all the way. Not performed. Just, for one moment, the door inside that face swings slightly wider, and you can see what is behind it. And what is behind it is vast and protective, and still learning how to be here. He puts one hand briefly on the top of Malachi's head. Light. Careful. Like a man who is learning the weight of the things he is allowed to touch. Malachi looks up at him. "Don't let Zara burn the cereal," Malachi says. Donovan removes his hand. "Cereal doesn't burn." "Malachi has a method," Jackson says from the doorway. "Don't ask." They leave the kitchen. In the hallway, Donovan stops. Looks at Jackson. The house is quiet around them. Through the front window, the oak trees are grey-gold in the early light, and standing the way they always stand. If Wendell tries to use this meeting to, "I know how to read a room," Jackson says. "I know you do." Donovan is quiet for a moment. "I mean, if he says anything to you about your value in this, about what you are to me," to Malachi. He pauses, finding the precise word, the way he always does when the sentence matters. Don't let him make it feel like a vulnerability. Jackson looks at him. "It isn't one," Donovan says. "What I feel is not a weakness he can use. I need you to know that before we walk into that room." The hallway holds them both for a moment. The old house, the amber light, the photographs of a woman who was the best person her grandson knew. Jackson looks at Donovan. At this man who carries everything quietly, who finds what he is looking for without telling anyone he is looking, who stood between his son and a hotel room door for 8 hours without being asked. I know, Jackson says, and for the first time, he means it without reservation. The restaurant is called Meridian. It sits on a corner in the Flatiron district. Dark wood, tall windows, the kind of place where the tables are far enough apart that no one can hear anyone else's conversation, which is either excellent restaurant design or a deliberate feature for men who have certain kinds of conversations over lunch. At 9 in the morning, it is not yet open to the public. The front door is unlocked. They go in. Wendell Hale is already seated, and he is at a corner table with a clear sightline to every entrance. Of course he is. With a cup of coffee in front of him and his cane leaning against the chair beside him at the angle of something he has placed there deliberately, to be seen. His silver hair is combed, his jacket is pressed. He looks, at first view, like a retired man having a quiet breakfast. He looks like exactly what he wanted Donovan to believe he was for the past 3 years. He looks at Jackson first, not Donovan. Jackson. He looks at Jackson the way people look at the thing they did not plan for, with a specific quality of attention that contains, underneath its composure, the smallest adjustment. The recalibration of someone who expected one variable and found another. Jackson Caldwell, Wendell says, "Sit down." Jackson sits. Donovan sits beside him. Neither of them speaks first. Wendell looks between them. He picks up his coffee cup, sets it down. "You are not what I expected," he says to Jackson. "I expected someone who would be frightened." "I am frightened," Jackson says evenly. "I'm just not performing it for you." Wendell's mouth adjusts slightly, not a smile, something more internal. The acknowledgement of someone who has lived long enough to recognize when they are dealing with a particular kind of person. "My son is contained," Wendell says to Donovan. "Whatever Petra Voss told you, Petra told me nothing." Donovan's voice is level. "Darius told me everything 2 hours ago, on the phone, voluntarily." He looks at Wendell steadily. "You raised him to be loyal to the family above everything else. He decided, when the situation was clear enough, that the family included telling the truth." Something moves through Wendell's face. Grief, maybe. Something old and specific. "I am prepared to offer you an arrangement," Wendell says. He is looking at Donovan, but the words feel directed at the table, at the space between all of them. "The consortium withdraws from New York. I withdraw completely. My involvement, my son's involvement, ends, in exchange for Donovan's agreement to leave the March acquisition in the hands of a neutral holding company for 2 years. Shared oversight. No winner." Donovan is quiet. "That is a significant concession from my side," Wendell says. "What I am asking in return is modest." "You're asking me to delay becoming untouchable," Donovan says, "for 2 years, during which time you rebuild, during which time we all step back. You don't step back. You've never stepped back in your life." Donovan looks at him with the complete, undecorated directness of a man who has decided that this conversation will not be managed from across a table. "You used my son to put pressure on me, a 6-year-old child whose name you found in a staffing record at 4 in the morning. Whatever arrangement you're offering, Wendell, you started this conversation by putting a car outside a school." Wendell looks at his coffee cup. "That was a mistake in judgment," he says, quietly. "I am telling you that directly." "Yes," Donovan says. "It was. A beat." "My proposal stands," Wendell says. "Your proposal is not why I came," Donovan says. He sits forward slightly. "I came because Jackson asked to be here. And Jackson is here because there is something you need to understand about the position you are actually in." Wendell looks at Jackson. Jackson opens the folder on the table in front of him. It is printed. Zara found a printer in the farmhouse office, which Jackson discovered at 6 a.m., while Donovan made a second round of calls. Inside the folder, dates, plate numbers, arrival and departure times, 2 partial phone numbers, and a detailed log of 6 months of private meetings in the Whitmore estate dining room, written in the precise, unhurried handwriting of a man who has been keeping records his entire professional life. Jackson sets it in front of Wendell. Wendell looks down at it. His face, for the first time since they entered the restaurant, becomes very still in a different way than it has been still before. And the stillness of a man reading something he did not know existed. reading his own movements, his own voice, his own private phone number on a piece of paper produced by a person who was refilling his water glass. This is a copy, Jackson says. The original and 2 additional copies are in locations I will not name and with people I will not identify. They have instructions for what to do with the information if they don't hear from me directly by a time I have not told you. He looks at Wendell, not with anger, with the same steady, unblinking directness he has used in every room where someone powerful expected him not to be paying attention. This is not a threat. I want to be clear about that. I do not operate in threats. This is information. And information is what it is, regardless of what anyone decides to do with it. Wendell is quiet for a long time. You've been keeping this for 6 months, he says. I keep everything, Jackson says. It's a professional habit. You had no idea it would matter. I had no idea you existed, Jackson says. I just keep records because rooms tell you everything if you listen to them long enough. Another silence. Longer. Wendell looks at Donovan, then back at Jackson, then at the folder on the table. Then he does something that neither of them expected. He exhales, long, slow, the exhale of a man setting something down that has been in his hands for a very long time. My son told the truth, Wendell says. Yes, Donovan says. Then I have been running an operation that my own son has already ended. He looks at his coffee. That is a particular kind of conclusion. It is, Donovan says. Wendell is quiet for a moment. When he looks up, something in his face is different. Not defeated, not broken, but reorganized. The face of a man who is genuinely, clearly recalculating not the tactics, but something older. I was trying to protect what Darius and I built together. I should have asked him first if it was worth protecting. Nobody at the table says anything. Wendell picks up his cane, sets it against his leg, this time without the performance. It leans against him like what it actually is, something a man uses because he needs it. I'll make the call to the consortium this morning. New York is done. He stands, slower than Jackson expected, actually slower, the cane doing real work. He looks at Jackson one more time. You should have been in this room a long time ago, he says, not as the help. He nods once, the nod of a man who means a specific thing and trusts the recipient to understand which thing it is. Then he walks to the front of the restaurant and out the door, and the street receives him, and he is gone. The restaurant is quiet. Donovan looks at the folder on the table, looks at Jackson. You printed that at 6 in the morning, he says. 5:52, Jackson says, while I was on the phone. You had things to manage. I had a printer and a folder I found in your grandmother's office desk. Donovan looks at him. Something in his face does the thing it has been doing all night. Opens, that small, vast, honest opening. And this time it stays open a little longer before it is composed again. Jackson, he says. I know, Jackson says. You don't know what I was going to say. I know enough of it. They sit for a moment in the empty restaurant, the morning light coming through the tall windows in long flat bands across the old wood tables. Outside, the Flatiron district is waking up. A delivery truck, a woman walking fast with a coffee cup, 2 pigeons on the corner doing what pigeons do. Donovan reaches across the table, sets his hand open on the surface between them. Not on Jackson's hand, not reaching. Just there, available. A door left open without pressure to walk through it. Jackson looks at his hand. He looks at the window. He thinks about a hotel room 7 years ago and a tray of champagne glasses that did not fall. He thinks about a gravel road in Westchester and a porch light left on, like something expected home. And he thinks about a 6-year-old boy who tells a man he just met that he doesn't drop people even when he's doing other things, and that's important. He puts his hand on top of Donovan's. They don't say anything. The light comes through the windows. 4 hours later, in a farmhouse kitchen in Westchester, Malachi Caldwell beats Zara Mack at a card game she invented the rules to and wins with such precise, systematic focus that Zara sits back in her chair and says, Your son is going to be extraordinary. Jackson, standing in the kitchen doorway with a cup of tea, says, I know. Donovan beside him says nothing. He just watches his son arrange the winning cards in a perfectly straight line across the kitchen table of his grandmother's house in the morning light. And with the brown rabbit propped against the fruit bowl and the picture book open on the counter, and 6 years of distance finally, permanently, behind them. The oak trees outside hold still, the house breathes, and in the particular quiet of a place that has been waiting a long time to be lived in rather than just kept, something settles. Not an ending, a beginning that finally knows what it is. Wendell Hale walked out of that restaurant because of a folder printed at 5:52 in the morning by a man who was supposed to be invisible. And Donovan Osei, the most powerful man in that room, extended his hand and waited. That is what it looks like when strength meets strength, and neither one flinches. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop in the comments which moment in this story stayed with you the most. And subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notifications. There are more stories coming to this channel. Stories about power, about love, about the people everyone underestimates until it is too late. And you do not want to miss a single one. We will see you in the